The morning star still hung low when Nora struck the triangle, its metallic clang cutting through the pre-dawn quiet of the llano. The sound rolled across the camp like a prayer bell, rousing men from their bedrolls scattered around the dying embers of last night's fire. She didn't need to ring it twice. Trail hands knew better than to be late for breakfast when salt was cooking. In the dim light, she moved between the chuck wagon and the fire pit with practiced efficiency. Coffee first, always coffee. The big enamel pot went on the iron spider over the coals she'd nursed back to life. While it heated, she pulled out her sourdough starter, kept warm through the night wrapped in oilcloth. The smell of it, sharp and alive, mixed with the smoke and the distant scent of cattle. Morning, salt. The voice came from behind her, low and steady. Elias Boone stood at the edge of the firelight, already dressed for the day's work. His hat threw shadows across his face, but she could see the careful way he moved, favoring his left shoulder where an old injury still troubled him on cold mornings. Coffee'll be ready in 5. She didn't look up from her mixing bowl, working flour and starter together with strong, sure movements. Biscuits in 20. He nodded, though she wasn't watching. That was their way, few words, understood rhythms. She heard his boots move toward the remuda where the horses stirred and nickered, sensing the day's work ahead. By the time the eastern sky showed its first blush of color, she had biscuits in the Dutch oven, bacon sizzling in the big skillet, and beans warming in their pot. The men began to gather, tin plates and cups in hand, forming a rough line. They knew the rules: no pushing, no complaints. Everyone gets fed. She'd established that order her first week with the outfit, using nothing more than a steady gaze and a ladle wielded like a weapon. "Heard tell you're the only cook on the llano who's never been kissed," young Tommy Garrett said, grinning as he held out his plate. He was new, hired on at the last town, still testing boundaries. Nora's hands didn't pause in their serving. A dollop of beans, 2 biscuits, 3 strips of bacon. You hear a lot of things on the trail. Boy, most of them about as useful as a milk bucket under a bull. The older hands chuckled, but Tommy pressed on. "Jake says you made a promise. Says no man's ever gonna—" "Jake says too much," she cut him off, already serving the next man. "And you'd best worry about keeping your seat in the saddle today instead of flapping your gums about what you don't understand." Elias appeared at the end of the line, having finished his morning check of the remuda. When he reached her, she set down the serving spoon and pulled something from her apron pocket, a folding knife, its blade freshly honed. "Noticed yours was getting dull yesterday," she said, placing it in his palm. Their fingers didn't touch. "Can't have the trail boss cutting himself because his knife won't hold an edge." He examined the blade, testing it against his thumb. "Sharp enough to shave with." "Obliged." He tucked it into his vest pocket. "We'll move out soon as the sun clears the horizon. Got 30 miles to make today if we want good water by nightfall." She nodded, already turning back to clean the breakfast dishes. But something in the air had shifted. A horse approaching from outside the camp circle, moving too fast for the early hour. Joe Greeley rode in like bad weather, his bay horse lathered despite the cool morning. 2 men flanked him, the kind who wore their guns low and their intentions clear. Greeley was a stock detective, which was a fancy way of saying he hunted men for money and asked questions later. His coat was dusty, his face weathered into permanent suspicion. He swung down from his horse without invitation, walked straight to the chuck wagon. From inside his coat, he produced a folded paper, slapped it face down on Nora's work table. The sound was sharp as a gunshot in the morning quiet. "Thought you might be interested in this, Miss Valdez." The way he said her name made it sound like an accusation. Elias had moved closer, casual-like, but Nora saw his hand drift near his hip. "Man ought to state his business before he starts spreading paper around my camp." Greeley's smile was thin as wire. "My business is with your cook, though I reckon it might become yours soon enough. Mr. Boone." He tapped the paper. "Go on, take a look." Unless you already know what it says. Nora wiped her hands on her apron, slow and deliberate. She didn't reach for the paper. Instead, her eyes went to her cookbook, propped open beside the supplies. Its leather cover showed scorch marks along one edge, and the corner of something, another paper, peeked out between the pages. "I've got dishes to wash and bread to start for lunch," she said. "Whatever you're selling, we're not buying." "Not selling, hunting." Greeley's voice dropped lower. "Woman about your age, about your look. Wanted for burning down a feed store and poisoning a whole herd of cattle up in Amarillo way. Interesting thing is, she was a cook too." The camp had gone still. Every man watched, coffee growing cold in their cups. Elias picked up the paper, unfolded it, studied it. His face gave away nothing. After a long moment, he crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the fire. "Don't see any woman here matching that description." "Maybe you need to look closer." Greeley's hand moved toward his gun. Just a twitch. "Maybe you need to ride on." Elias's voice carried the kind of quiet that came before thunderstorms. "We've got cattle to move and miles to make. You've delivered your paper. Now you can deliver yourself back to wherever you came from." The two groups of men faced each other across the morning fire. Steam rose from the coffee pot. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark started its day's song. Nora stood perfectly still, her hand resting on the handle of the Dutch oven, feeling the heat through the cloth she used to protect her palm. Greeley looked from Elias to Nora, then to the burned cookbook, calculating. "I'll be seeing you again, Miss Valdez, real soon." He touched his hat brim in mock courtesy, gathered his reins. "Might want to ask your boss why he's so quick to burn paper without reading it proper. Might be he knows more than he's saying." They watched him ride out, his men following like shadows. Only when the dust settled did the camp breathe again. Tommy Garrett was the first to speak. "Salt, was that man saying you—" "That man was saying nothing worth repeating." Elias cut him off. "Now finish your breakfast and get to work. Cattle won't drive themselves." The men scattered to their tasks, but the morning's easy rhythm was broken. Nora gathered the dishes, movements sharp and efficient. When she reached for the Dutch oven, she found Elias beside her. "That paper," she said quietly. "You didn't read it." "Didn't need to." He picked up the water bucket, headed for the stream. "I know my people." She watched him go, then turned to her cookbook, the paper hidden inside a page torn from a ledger. Columns of numbers that didn't add up. Signatures that told a different story than the one Greeley was spreading stayed where it was. For now. The sun climbed higher, painting the llano in shades of gold and brown. She mixed her bread dough, shaped it into loaves, set them to rise. Her hands moved in old patterns, the same ones her mother had taught her before everything went wrong. As she worked, she traced a design in the flour dust on her work table, a spiral, like a whirlwind, like rain yet to come. It was an old mark, a family thing. Her mother used to say it called the seasons for those who survived to see them. Nora wiped it away with one quick motion. The trail stretched north toward Kansas, toward the railheads and the buyers and the hope of profit that kept these men moving. But Greeley would follow. Men like him always did, and somewhere between here and there, between the rivers and the storms and the long grass, choices would have to be made. She struck the triangle again, this time to call the men to gather the herd. Its sound rang out across the camp, across the wide plain, a declaration and a warning all at once. The cattle began to move. And with them, the whole great machinery of the trail drive stirred to life. Whatever came next, they'd meet it on the move. That was the way of the trail, the way of the West. You kept going until you couldn't, and then you found a way to go a little further. Nora cleaned her knife and put it away. There was lunch to think about, and dinner after that. The work never stopped, and that was good. It kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering to places better left alone. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between tasks, she remembered her mother's voice. keep your heart clean as a kitchen at dawn. Mia, just fire and water. Nothing else can touch you then. She'd kept that promise so far. But promises, like everything else on the trail, could be tested by weather and circumstance, and the horizon, for all its emptiness, had a way of bringing both when you least expected them. The chuck wagon creaked and groaned as it rolled across the hardpan, following the dust cloud raised by 2,000 head of longhorns. 3 days had passed since Greeley's visit. 3 days of normal trail routine, or what passed for normal when every man kept glancing over his shoulder. Nora had just finished securing the supplies when she noticed it. There, nailed to the side of her wagon where it hadn't been that morning, was a piece of wood no bigger than her hand. Words had been carved deep into the grain with an angry knife. Liars burned twice. She stood still for a moment, studying the crude letters. Around her, the camp was settling into its evening rhythm. Cowboys unsaddled horses, started cook fires, shook out bedrolls. None of them looked her way, but she felt watched all the same. Working quickly, she pried the wood free with her kitchen knife. The nails came out easily, too easily. Whoever had done this wanted her to find it, wanted her to know they could get this close. She walked to the main fire where Elias crouched, checking the coffee pot. "Found this decoration on my wagon." She kept her voice low, showing him the carved warning. He took it, turned it over in his hands. His jaw tightened. "When?" "Sometime today. Wasn't there this morning when I checked the axle grease?" Without a word, he stood and tossed the wood into the fire. They watched it catch, the carved words blackening and curling before disappearing into ash. Neither spoke of what it meant that someone in the outfit had put it there, or let someone else close enough to do it. "I'll post extra guards tonight," he said finally. "Don't change things on my account." She turned back toward her wagon. "I've dealt with worse than nasty words." But he followed her, boots crunching on the dry grass. "That paper Greeley left, the accusation about the fire." "You burned it," she reminded him. "I burned what he wanted us to see. Doesn't mean I don't have questions." She pulled out her big pot, started measuring beans for tomorrow's breakfast. "Questions are like salt. Mr. Boone. A little seasons the meal. Too much ruins it." He watched her work for a moment. "My brother used to say something similar. Said questions were like whiskey. The more you had, the less clear things got." It was the first time he'd mentioned his brother to her. She knew the story, of course. Everyone did. How young Sam Boone had died in a stampede up Kansas way, trampled trying to turn the herd. How Elias blamed himself for sending the boy to the wrong position. "Smart man, your brother." "He was 17. The words came out rough. "Too young to be playing cowboy, but I let him come along anyway." Nora measured beans with careful precision, letting the silence stretch just long enough. Then she did something she rarely did. She told a piece of truth. "My mother was 34 when she died. Took the blame for missing supplies that the ranch manager had sold off. They said she set the fire to cover her theft. But she didn't. It wasn't a question, and she was grateful for that. No, she kept perfect books. Too perfect. Showed exactly where every pound of grain went, every bit of salt." She smiled without humor. "That was her mistake, being too honest." Elias shifted his weight, and for a moment she thought he might reach out, might bridge the careful distance between them. But he just nodded toward her cookbook. "That why you keep that burned book reminder?" "Among other reasons." She closed the bean pot, set it aside. "We all carry our dead with us, one way or another." The camp was fully dark now, except for the fires, somewhere out on guard. A cowboy started singing low and mournful to keep the cattle calm. The tune drifted across the prairie like smoke. "I should check on the night riders," Elias said. But he didn't move. Nora reached for her mixing bowl, the one she used for biscuits every morning, without really thinking about it. She took a handful of flour and spread it on the wagon's fold-down work surface. In the flour, her finger traced a pattern, a spiral, turning inward and then out again. "What is that?" His voice was quiet. curious. Something my mother showed me. Her mother showed her. She completed the spiral, added small marks around its edge like raindrops. She said it was for calling the rain in dry times, for the people who survived to need it. Does it work? She looked up at him then. Really looked. In the firelight, his face showed all the wear of the trail sun lines, dust in the creases, the weight of responsibility in his eyes. Don't know. Haven't had anyone to survive for in a long time. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, instead of words, he picked up a handful of flour and let it sift through his fingers onto her pattern. It felt like snow, like time, partially obscuring the spiral but not erasing it. Maybe that's changing, he said. Before she could respond, a shout went up from the edge of camp. One of the younger hands, Billy Morrison, came running into the firelight. "Mister, Boone Rider's coming. 3, maybe 4. Elias was moving before the boy finished speaking, his hand checking his sidearm. "Which direction?" "North. Coming slow, like they don't want to spook the herd." "Could be other trail hands," Nora suggested, but she was already putting her knife within easy reach. "Could be." Elias didn't sound convinced. "Billy, get the men up. Quiet like. Don't want to start a stampede over nothing." The camp stirred to life, men rising from their bedrolls with the practiced ease of those who lived ready for trouble. Nora stayed by her wagon, outwardly calm, continuing her dinner preparations, but under her apron, her hand found the handle of her skinning knife. The riders materialized from the darkness like ghosts. 4 men, moving easy in their saddles, hands visible and away from their weapons. The lead rider called out while still at a safe distance. "Hello, the camp, looking for the Circle Bar outfit?" "You found it," Elias called back. "State your business." The riders came closer, into the edge of the firelight. Cowboys, by the look of them, dusty and trail-worn. The leader, a man with gray in his beard, swung down from his horse. "Name's Porter. We're with the Rocking J. Day behind you. Our cook took sick. Had to leave him in town. Hoping you might spare some biscuits and coffee. We can pay." It was reasonable. Trail outfits helped each other when they could. But the timing, so soon after Greeley's visit and the wooden warning. "How'd you know we were Circle Bar?" Elias asked. Porter grinned. "Met a fellow earlier today. Said you were ahead of us. Stock detective. I think real friendly type." The sarcasm was thick. "Said you had the best cook on the trail. Figured if we were going to beg food, might as well beg from the best." Nora stepped forward then. 4 men, that all you need to feed?" "Yes, ma'am. Just something to tide us over until we reach town tomorrow." She looked at Elias, saw him weighing the situation. Then she made the decision for both of them. "I've got leftover biscuits and some beans. Coffee, too. No charge trail helps trail." Relief washed over Porter's face. "Much obliged, ma'am." As she prepared the food, she listened to the men talk. Normal trail gossip weather, grass conditions, cattle prices in Kansas. But underneath it, she caught the careful way Porter watched her, how his eyes kept going to her burned cookbook. When she handed him the wrapped food, he leaned in close. "That detective, Greeley, he's telling a story about you in town. Ugly story." "Stories are cheap out here," she said evenly. "True enough, but he's also paying for information, offering good money to anyone who sees anything. Interesting." Porter's eyes were kind but worried. "Thought you should know. Appreciate the warning." The Rocking J men left as quietly as they'd come, swallowed by the darkness. But their visit had stirred something in the camp. Nora could feel it in the way the men looked at her. Some curious, some suspicious, all wondering what kind of trouble she might bring down on them. She cleaned up with mechanical precision, each movement a kind of meditation. When everything was secured, she found herself back at the flour-dusted board. The spiral was still there, half buried under Elias's addition. Without thinking, she completed it again, adding the rain marks around the edge. "You're worried." Elias had returned, standing just outside the circle of firelight. Worried is for people with something to lose. She wiped the board clean with one sweep of her hand. I'm just thinking ahead. To what? She looked out at the darkness where the cattle moved and breathed like a living sea. To the next meal, the next camp, the next town where Greeley will be waiting with his stories and his money. We could take a different trail. Head west to... No. The word came out sharp. I won't have you losing time and money over my troubles. Won't have the men suffering for it either. He stepped closer, into the light. My decision to make... Is it... She faced him fully now. When they start choosing between Greeley's gold and loyalty to a brand, when they start wondering if maybe his stories are true, you think I care about stories? I think you care about getting these cattle to market, about keeping your men safe, about not failing anyone else the way you think you failed your brother. The words hung in the air like struck iron. His face went still, closed. For a moment, she thought he might walk away. Instead, he said, he asked me to put him on point that day, begged me, said he was ready. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. His voice was rough. Wanted to believe I could keep him safe and let him grow up at the same time. Nora wiped her hands on her apron, a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. We all want to believe things. Doesn't make us liars when they don't come true. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, deliberately, he reached out and took a pinch of flour from her supply. This time, instead of letting it fall, he drew his own mark beside where hers had been a simple cross, like a marker, like a grave, like a crossroads. Maybe not, he said, but it makes us careful about what we believe next time. The night pressed in around them, full of small sounds, cattle lowing, men snoring, the endless whisper of prairie wind. Somewhere out there, Greeley was spreading his poison. Someone in their own camp had nailed that warning to her wagon. The trail ahead stretched long and uncertain. But for now, there was this two people standing in the circle of firelight, flour dust between them like snow, like promises, like all the words they couldn't say. Tomorrow would bring its own troubles. Tonight, they had this moment of understanding, fragile as fresh bread, necessary as salt. Nora covered her supplies, checked the wagon one more time. As she climbed up to her bedroll, she saw Elias still standing by the fire, staring into the flames, watching over them all, the way he always did, carrying his ghosts, the way they all did. The stars wheeled overhead, and the cattle moved in their sleep, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The sound was lonely and wild and free, like everything out here on the edge of the world. She pulled her blanket up, closed her eyes, and tried not to think about spirals in the flour, or the way his hand had moved when he made his mark, or how much longer she could keep her promises to the dead when the living were starting to matter more. The creek had looked tame enough in the morning light, a thin ribbon of water cutting through the prairie, barely worth calling wet. But the Llano had its own ways of teaching humility, and by the time the chuck wagon reached the crossing, yesterday's mountain rain had transformed the gentle stream into a churning brown torrent. Nora stood on the bank, calculating. The main herd had crossed 2 hours ago when the water was lower, the cowboys whooping and hollering to keep the cattle moving. Now, with the supply wagon, it would be different, trickier. We'll double-team it, Elias said, riding up beside the wagon. Water droplets from the earlier crossing still clung to his chaps. Put extra horses on. Take it slow. She nodded, already securing everything that could shift. Pots nested inside pots. Flour barrels lashed tight. Her precious sourdough starter wrapped in 3 layers of oilcloth. The burned cookbook went inside her personal bundle, safe from any water that might breach the wagon bed. They hitched 2 more horses to the team, strong animals that knew their business. Jake Holloway and Tom Brennan rode up to help guide from the sides. Good men, steady. But Nora saw the way Jake's eyes kept sliding toward her, calculating. Since Greeley's visit, She'd caught him watching more than once. "Ready?" Elias asked. She took her seat, gathered the reins. "Ready?" The first part went smooth enough. The horses entered the water strong and sure, the wagon wheels finding purchase on the creek bottom. Water rose to the wheel hubs, then higher, but the crossing looked good, manageable. Then the front wheel hit the hole. It happened fast. The wagon lurched sideways, the current catching it broadside. Nora felt the bench tilt beneath her as the whole rig threatened to tip. The horses screamed, fighting their harness as water rose to their bellies. "Hey, get her out of there," someone shouted. But Nora was already moving, trying to shift her weight to counterbalance. The reins burned through her hands as she fought to keep the horses straight. Water surged over the wagon bed, soaking the supplies, trying to float everything downstream. Then Elias was there, spurring his horse into the torrent. He leaned from his saddle, grabbed the lead horse's bridle, using his mount's weight to pull the team forward. "Now!" he yelled. "Drive them now!" She did, putting every ounce of strength into urging the horses forward. The wagon groaned, tilted further, then suddenly lurched free of the hole. But the motion was too violent. Nora felt herself sliding, her wet hands losing their grip on the bench. The water took her. Cold shocked through her body as the current swept her off the wagon. Her heavy skirts pulled her down immediately, boots filling with water. The world became a brown chaos of churning mud and debris. She couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't find air, couldn't... A hand caught her arm, strong as iron, then an arm around her waist, hauling her up. Her head broke the surface and she gasped. Coughing creek water. Elias had her, his horse fighting to keep footing as he dragged her across his saddle. "Hold on," he said against her ear. "Just hold on." She grabbed his arm, his shirt, anything solid as he spurred toward the bank. Behind them, she could hear men shouting, working to save the wagon. But all she could focus on was breathing, on the solid warmth of him against the cold that tried to claim her. They made the bank in a rush of hooves and spray. He swung down, pulled her after him. Her legs wouldn't hold too much water in her clothes, too much shock in her system. She went to her knees in the mud, still coughing. "You hurt!" His hands were on her shoulders, her face, checking for damage. She shook her head, unable to speak yet. Water streamed from her hair, her clothes. She was soaked through, cold to the bone, but alive. "Damn foolish," he muttered, but his hands were gentle as he helped her sit back. Should have waited for the water to drop. "The supplies," she managed. Jake and Tom got the wagon across. Most everything's wet but salvageable. He pulled off his coat, wrapped it around her shoulders. It was wet too, but warmer than nothing. "You sure you're not hurt?" She nodded, finally getting her breath back. That's when she realized how close he was, kneeling in the mud beside her. His hat was gone, lost to the creek, and his dark hair dripped water down his face. His hands still rested on her shoulders, and she could feel the tremor in them, fear or cold or something else. "Thank you," she said. Something shifted in his eyes. For a moment, the careful distance he always maintained cracked, and she saw what lay beneath, not just concern for a member of his outfit, but something deeper, more personal. Then he blinked, and the wall came back up. "Let's get you warm," he said, helping her to her feet. The camp that night was subdued. Everything that could be dried was spread on bushes and rocks, the whole area looking like a vast laundry. Nora had changed into her only spare dress, hung her wet things by the fire, and set about salvaging what she could of the foodstuffs. The flour was partially ruined, but she'd saved enough for a few days if she was careful. The beans had survived, sealed in their heavy sack. The coffee well. Cowboys would drink coffee that had been boiled with their boots if necessary. A little creek water wouldn't hurt it. As she worked, the men filtered by one at a time. Each had some small excuse, returning a borrowed cup, asking about dinner, checking if she needed anything, but she knew what they were really doing, making sure she was all right. It touched her more than she could say. That was something today. Tom Brennan said, warming his hands by her cook fire. The way you tried to save that wagon? Never seen a woman fight water like that. Didn't do much good, she said, testing tomorrow's biscuit dough. The starter had survived. Thank God. Did more than most would. He paused. My wife. She was brave like that. Back in Missouri, faced down a grass fire once to save our milk cow. His voice went soft with memory. Been gone 4 years now. Fever took her. Nora looked up at him. Tom was one of the quiet ones. Never said much. I'm sorry. He shrugged. Just saying. Bravery's worth noticing. Worth... He glanced toward where Elias stood talking with the night guards. Worth protecting. After he left, Nora sat by her fire, thinking the water had washed away more than just flour and coffee. It had stripped away pretense, revealed things better left hidden. The way Elias had come for her without hesitation. The way she'd clung to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. The way the men now looked at her with something approaching acceptance, maybe even affection. Dangerous territory, all of it. She was heating water to wash when Elias appeared. He'd found another hat somewhere, had changed into dry clothes, but she could still see the marks of the day on him, the stiffness in his shoulder where his horse had fought the current, the scrape on his hand from the rescue. Brought your knife back, he said, holding out the folding blade she'd given him days ago. Lost it in the water, but Billy found it downstream. She took it, noticed he'd already dried and oiled it. Seems we're even then, a rescue for a rescue. That's not how it works. No. She set the knife aside, poured hot water into her wash basin. How does it work then? He was quiet for a moment. Then, instead of answering directly, he said, Can I see your hands? She looked down. Her palms were raw from the rains, blistered and rope-burned. She hadn't even noticed in all the chaos. Thought so. He reached into his vest, pulled out a small tin. Sheep tallow and herbs, good for burns. I can tend myself. I know you can, but he didn't move away. After a moment, she held out her hands. He took them carefully, his own hands warm and calloused. The salve was cool on her burns, and he worked it in with gentle circular motions. She watched his face as he concentrated on the task, the way his brow furrowed, the care in his movements. Your brother, she said quietly. This what you wished you could do for him, save him from the water. His hands stilled. Wasn't water that took Sam? Was 2,000 head of panicked beef and my own poor judgment. Still, the saving impulse, it's strong in you. He resumed his work, finishing one hand, starting on the other. Maybe I just couldn't stand to lose my best cook. It was meant to lighten the moment, but something in his voice gave it away. She turned her hand in his, caught his fingers. Elias. He looked up then, and there it was again, that crack in the armor, that glimpse of the man beneath the trail boss. You scared me today, he admitted, when you went under. But I didn't stay under. No. He looked at their joined hands. You didn't. A log popped in the fire, sending sparks into the darkening sky. Around them, the camp settled into evening routines, but they stayed like that, her hands in his, the salve warming between their skin, neither willing to break the contact first. Finally, she pulled away gently. I should start dinner. The men will be hungry after today. He nodded, stood. But before he left, he said, That mark you make in the flour, the spiral, you never finished telling me what it means. She looked up at him, silhouetted against the fire. My grandmother said it was about survival, about calling rain for the drought, calling sun for the flood, balance. She paused. But my mother said it was simpler than that, said it was about knowing which storms to weather and which to dance in. And which was today. She thought about the water, the fear, the solid warmth of his arms. I'm still deciding. He smiled then. Just a little. Let me know when you figure it out. After he left, She set about making dinner with hands that barely hurt anymore, wrapped in the warmth of sheep tallow and something else, something unnamed but no less real. The men ate well that night, fresh biscuits despite the flour loss, beans flavored with the last of the salt pork, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Jake Holloway watched her all through dinner, his expression unreadable. She met his gaze once, held it until he looked away. Whatever he was thinking, whatever calculations ran behind his eyes, she couldn't control, could only control her own actions, her own choices. Later, as she cleaned the dishes, she found herself drawing the spiral again in the thin layer of flour on her workboard. This time, she added something new, a wavy line through the center, like a river, like a path, like the way forward when the way back was already washed away. The stars came out clear and sharp, the storm that had swelled the creek having passed on to trouble someone else's trail. She could hear the night guard singing to the cattle, could smell the sage and dust that meant another day survived, another mile closer to whatever waited at trail's end. Her mother had known about keeping hearts clean, about fire and water and nothing else. But her mother had never stood in a flooding creek, never felt someone pull her back from the edge, never had to decide between the safety of isolation and the danger of connection. Nora covered the sourdough, banked the fires, made ready for sleep. Tomorrow they'd reach the main fork of the Canadian River. More water to cross, more chances to lose everything or save what mattered most. The trail didn't offer easy choices, just the next horizon and the hope you were strong enough to reach it. She touched her palm where the salve still worked its healing, where his hands had been gentle and sure. Outside, a wolf howled distant and wild. The sound raised goosebumps on her arms, but not from fear, from recognition, from the understanding that some things couldn't be tamed, could only be accepted or left behind. The choice, like the trail, stretched out before her, and somewhere in the darkness, she knew Elias lay awake too, wrestling with his own ghosts, his own possibilities. The water had changed things. What remained was to see if they were brave enough to admit it. The morning broke gray and uncertain, matching the mood that had settled over the camp like dust. 3 riders approached from the east, moving with the deliberate pace of men who wanted to be seen coming. Greeley rode in the center, his coat pushed back to show the badge pinned to his vest. The 2 men flanking him were new, harder cases than before, with faces that had forgotten how to smile. Nora was elbowed deep in bread dough when they arrived, but she'd seen them coming, had time to slip the folded ledger page from her cookbook into the hidden pocket sewn inside her apron. Her hands kept working, steady and sure, as if armed men were as common as sunrise. Morning, Mr. Boone. Greeley didn't dismount this time, stayed high on his horse, looking down at the camp like a judge from his bench. Brought something you should see. From inside his coat, he produced a rolled document, sealed with wax, official, legal, the kind of paper that changed lives whether the accusations were true or not. Warrant, he said, letting the word hang in the air. From Judge Hewitt up in Amarillo, for the arrest of one Leonora Valdez on charges of arson and destruction of property. The camp went still. Every man stopped what he was doing. Coffee cups frozen halfway to lips. Hands paused in the act of saddling horses. The only sound was the distant lowing of cattle and the pop of the cook fire. Elias stepped forward, positioning himself between Greeley and the chuck wagon. Let me see that. Greeley smiled, but handed it down. All legal and proper. Judge Hewitt's a thorough man, likes his evidence clear and his justice swift. While Elias read, Nora kept kneading, push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. The rhythm of it kept her centered, kept her from looking at the men gathering in a loose circle. She could feel their eyes, some sympathetic, some suspicious, all waiting to see how this would play. This says Leonora Valdez, Elias said finally. Don't see anyone here by that name. Don't play games. Boone. Greeley's voice hardened. Your cook matches the description perfect. Mexican woman, early 20s. Burn scar on her left hand from the fire she set. Involuntarily, Nora glanced at her hand. The scar was there. Yes, but from a childhood accident with hot oil, not from any fire in Amarillo. Still, who would believe that now? Lots of cooks have burn scars, Elias said. Comes with the job. Maybe so. Greeley leaned forward in his saddle. But how many of them keep ledger pages hidden in their cookbooks? How many of them run when questions start getting asked? Jake Holloway stepped out from behind the supply wagon. Saw her hide something this morning, Mr. Boone, in her apron, just when these fellows showed up. The betrayal hit like cold water. Nora's hand stilled on the dough. So that's how it was. Greeley's gold had found its mark. That true salt? Elias asked without turning around. She wiped her hands on her apron, feeling the hidden paper crinkle. I keep lots of things in my pockets. Recipes, shopping lists, nothing that concerns Mr. Greeley. Then you won't mind showing us, Greeley said. Actually, I would mind. She shaped the dough into a ball, covered it with a damp cloth. My pockets are my business, unless you're planning to search every man here too. Some of the cowboys shifted uncomfortably. The code of the West held privacy sacred. A man's possessions were his own. But a woman, especially one under suspicion. I'm the trail boss here. Elias said, my people are under my protection until we reach Kansas. You want to arrest someone. You'll need more than a paper and a paid informant. Jake's face flushed. Nobody paid me nothing. Just trying to keep trouble away from the outfit. Funny way of showing it. Tom Brennan muttered. Greeley held up a hand. No need for unpleasantness. I'm a reasonable man. Let me see what's in her pockets. Prove it's nothing important, and we'll be on our way. And if she refuses, then I'll assume she's got something to hide. Have to insist on taking her back to Amarillo for questioning. His hand drifted to his sidearm. One way or another. The tension stretched taut as fence wire. Nora counted the men, calculated odds. Most of the outfit would follow Elias, but how far would they risk their jobs, their pay, maybe their lives for a cook they'd known barely 2 weeks? She made the decision before anyone could make it for her. You want to see what I'm hiding, Mr. Greeley? I do indeed. She reached into her apron, pulled out the folded paper, but instead of handing it over, she held it up for everyone to see. This is a page from the supply ledger at the Double K Ranch. Shows discrepancies in the grain inventory. Shows where feed meant for cattle went instead. Shows whose signature approved the sales. Greeley's face didn't change, but his horse shifted nervously. Stolen evidence. Proves you had access to the storeroom before it burned. Proves I could copy numbers and names. She met his eyes steadily. My mother taught me to read and write, taught me to keep accurate records. That's not a crime. Your mother was a thief. My mother was a scapegoat. The words came out sharp as her kitchen knives. Convenient to blame when the real thief needed cover. Just like it's convenient to blame me now. Hand over the paper, Greeley said. No. Then you're under arrest. For what? Carrying paper, knowing how to read. She tucked the ledger page back in her pocket. You'll need more than that, even from Judge Hewitt. Greeley's hand moved to his gun. So did his men's. Around the camp, cowboys tensed, hands drifting to their own weapons, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Enough! Elias's voice cut through like a whip. Greeley, you've shown your warrant, made your accusations. We've heard them. Now you can ride on. This isn't over, Boone. Harbor a fugitive. You become one yourself. Then I guess I better make sure I'm not harboring any fugitives. He turned to Nora. Salt, you know anyone named Leonora Valdez? She understood what he was offering, a lie that might become truth if repeated enough. Never heard of her. There you have it. Elias faced Greeley again. No Leonora Valdez here, just my cook, who's got work to do, unless you plan to arrest everyone who can read and keeps paper in their pockets. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Greeley smiled, cold as winter wind. 3 days. Boone, that's how long it'll take me to wire Amarillo, get more men, come back with enough guns to take what I want. 3 days to think about whether protecting her is worth what it'll cost you. He wheeled his horse around, his men following. They rode out the way they'd come, deliberate and unhurried, leaving dust and divided loyalties in their wake. The camp exploded into noise the moment they were out of sight. Arguments, accusations, worry about what came next. Jake Holloway found himself backed against a wagon wheel by Tom Brennan and 2 others. "You sold us out," Tom said. "For what, 30 pieces of silver?" "I didn't sell nothing," Jake protested. "Just trying to protect the outfit. We don't know what she did or didn't do. Why risk everything for one of our own?" Tom finished. "That's why—" Elias let them argue for a moment, then whistled sharp enough to cut through the noise. "Enough, Jake. You're riding drag for the rest of the drive. Don't want to see you near the chuck wagon again. The rest of you, we've got cattle to move. Saddle up." The men dispersed slowly, still muttering. Nora went back to her bread, punching it down harder than necessary. She didn't look up when Elias approached. "That paper," he said quietly. "It real as the scar on my hand." She shaped loaves with practiced motions. "Real as my mother's grave." "Will it hold up in court?" "Against Judge Hewitt, owned by the same men who own the Double K?" She laughed, short and bitter. "What do you think?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why didn't you tell me when this first started?" She looked up at him. Then, "Tell you what, that I copied evidence of fraud, that I ran rather than burn like my mother, that I've been looking over my shoulder for 3 years, waiting for this day." She shook her head. "You hired a cook, not a crusade." "Maybe I hired both." "Then you hired wrong." She set the loaves to rise, covered them carefully. 3 days, he said, time enough to reach the border river. Maybe push on to— "We're not running. We're not— Changed my mind. We're going to take the old Butterfield route. Loop west through the canyon country. Longer. Harder. But Greeley won't expect it. Buy us time to think. The men won't like it. Extra days on the trail. Risky water sources. The men will do what I tell them." His jaw set stubborn. "And what I'm telling them is we don't abandon our own." The words sat between them, weighted with more than their surface meaning. Nora wiped her hands again, though they were already clean. "This isn't your fight, Elias." "Isn't it?" He looked out toward where the herd was gathering. "My brother died because I put him in harm's way. Made a bad call based on what I wanted to believe instead of what was true. Not making that mistake again. So instead you'll risk the whole outfit." "I'll risk what needs risking." He turned back to her. "That ledger page, is it the only proof?" "The only proof I have. There might be more back in Amarillo, but Greeley's friends will have destroyed it by now." He nodded, thinking, "Then we need to make sure that page survives, and that you survive to explain it. To who what court's going to listen to a Mexican cook over a respected stock detective? Don't know yet, but running just makes you look guilty. Fighting might at least give us options." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, throwing away his career and maybe his life for someone who'd brought him nothing but trouble. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself saying, "The old Butterfield route. My mother traveled it once. Said the canyon country was beautiful. Said it looked like God's own paint box had spilled across the rocks. Then maybe we'll have something nice to look at while we figure out how to keep you out of jail." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "Such a romantic." "Practical," he corrected. "Good scenery improves morale." He left to organize the route change, and Nora went back to her work. But her mind was on that folded paper, on the names and numbers that told a truth nobody wanted to hear. 3 days. Not much time to find justice in a land that often confused it with revenge. She'd kept her heart clean all these years, just like her mother taught, just fire and water, nothing else. But now the fire was spreading, and the water was rising, and somewhere between them was a narrow path that might lead to survival or might wash them all away. As she worked, she found herself humming her mother's song, the one about the dove who built her nest in the thorns. It was a sad song, full of loss and leaving, but it ended with the dove learning to sing sweeter for the pain, learning that thorns could protect as well as pierce. Maybe that's what this was. Maybe Elias and his stubborn loyalty were the thorns she needed. Maybe the pain coming would teach them all to sing a different tune. Or maybe they'd all end up burned or drowned or shot for their troubles. Either way, in 3 days, they'd know. The cook tent glowed amber in the late evening light, canvas walls holding in the warmth of the small stove and the smell of simmering beans. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the guy ropes and sending dust devils spinning across the camp. Nora sat on an upturned crate, her burned cookbook open on her lap, though she wasn't really reading the water-stained recipes. "Mind if I come in?" Elias stood at the tent flap, hat in hand. She gestured to another crate. "Your tent as much as mine." He ducked inside, seemed to fill the small space. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with unspoken things. "The men are restless," he said finally. "This detour's got them worried." "They should be worried." She traced a finger along the cookbook's scorched edge. "Greeley's not the type to give up easy." "Neither am I." She looked up at him then. Really looked. The lamplight caught the lines around his eyes, the streak of premature gray at his temple, a responsible man, worn down by the weight of other people's lives. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about my mother, about what really happened." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I'm listening." Nora closed the cookbook, held it in her lap like a shield. Her name was Elena Valdez. She kept the books for the Double K Ranch up near Amarillo, proud of her work, proud of her numbers. Everything balanced to the penny. The wind gusted, making the tent walls breathe in and out like something alive. The ranch manager, Calvin Morse, he'd been skimming, selling off grain meant for the cattle, pocketing the difference, thought he was clever about it. But Mama's books showed the truth. She tried to tell the owner, but Morse got there first, said she'd been stealing, cooking the books to cover it up. They believed him over her. A white man with connections over a Mexican woman. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What do you think?" Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The night before they were going to arrest her, there was a fire. The storehouse burned, taking all the grain and most of the records with it. Morse said Mama said it to destroy the evidence, but I know better. "She was with you. She was dying." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Had been for weeks, coughing up blood. Too weak to stand most days. Could barely hold a pen, much less carry a torch to the storehouse." She opened the cookbook again, pulled out the hidden ledger page. I'd been helping her with the books, learned her system, her way of marking things. The night of the fire, I was copying this page, the one that showed Morse's theft clearest. Mama made me promise to keep it safe, to find someone who'd listen someday. And then she died. 3 days after the fire, they were coming to arrest her, but the fever took her first. She folded the paper carefully, returned it to its hiding place. Morse spread the story that she'd confessed on her deathbed, said I'd helped her steal, helped set the fire. I ran that same night, been running since. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How old were you?" 16. He cursed, soft and vehement. "You were just a kid." Old enough to hang if Morse had his way. She closed the cookbook. "So now you know. Your cook's not just accused of crimes. She's been running from them for 7 years. 7 years. He shook his head. "That why you keep everyone at arm's length, the promise about no man touching you?" She stiffened. "That's different." "Is it?" My mother died with her name ruined, called a thief and worse. I swore I'd keep myself clean of any scandal, any whisper that could be used against me." She met his eyes. "A woman alone, especially a Mexican woman, has to be above reproach. One kiss, one moment of weakness, and suddenly you're not just a thief but a loose woman too. Makes it easier for men like Greeley to paint you guilty." "That's no way to live." "It's the only way I know." She stood, moved to the tent opening, looked out at the darkening sky. "I keep my heart like a clean kitchen, just work and purpose. Nothing messy, nothing that can spoil or burn." She heard him stand, felt him move closer but not touching. Always that careful distance between them. "That night at the creek," he said, "when I pulled you from the water, you were drowning, and all I could think was how I'd failed another person I was supposed to protect. But you didn't fail. You saved me." "Did I?" His voice was closer now, just behind her shoulder. "Or did I just delay the drowning?" She turned to face him, found him nearer than expected. Could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the scar on his chin from some long-ago accident. "That's not on you," she said. "Whatever happens with Greeley, with the law, I brought it on myself the day I ran instead of fighting. You were 16 and alone. What else could you do? I could have stayed, fought, died with the truth instead of living with the lie." "Your mother wouldn't have wanted that." "How do you know what she wanted?" The words came out sharp, edged with old pain. "Because she made you take that ledger page, made you promise to keep it safe." His hand lifted, like he might touch her face, then dropped. "She wanted you to survive, to wait for the right moment, the right person to believe you." "And you think you're that person?" "I think I'm a man who's made his own mistakes. Lost my brother by being too proud to admit I was wrong. Not going to lose." He stopped, jaw tightening. "Lose what?" she asked softly. "Nothing. Everything." He turned away, ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know anymore." The wind gusted again, stronger this time. The tent flap whipped open, and Nora moved to secure it. As she reached for the ties, Elias caught her hand. Not rough, just holding. "That scar," he said, turning her palm up. "You said it was from hot oil." "When I was 8, Mama was teaching me to make sopa pilas. I got impatient, moved too fast." She looked at the old burn, faded, but still visible. "She held my hand in cold water for an hour, crying the whole time, said it hurt her more than me." "Mothers are like that." His thumb traced the scar's edge, gentle as breathing. "Sam had a scar too, on his shoulder, from when he fell out of the barn loft. I carried him 2 miles to town for the doctor. He kept saying he was fine, but I could feel him shaking." "How old was he?" 10. I was 15. Thought I knew everything." He released her hand slowly. "Spent the next 7 years trying to make up for all the times I wasn't there to catch him. And then I put him on point during a lightning storm. Told him he was ready. Believed it because I wanted to believe it." His voice went rough. "The cattle spooked. Sam tried to turn them, just like I taught him. His horse went down in the crush." Nora wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but her own rules held her back. Instead, she said, "It wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it? I was trail boss. My job to read the weather, the cattle, the men. Failed at all 3 that night." "You're human. Humans make mistakes. Some mistakes you don't come back from." "And some you do." She moved back to her crate, picked up the cookbook. "My mother used to say that bread teaches patience. You can't rush the rise, can't force the yeast. Just have to trust the process, even when it seems like nothing's happening." "We're not talking about bread." "Aren't we?" She opened the book to a page marked with a ribbon. "This recipe sourdough starter takes weeks to develop, needs feeding every day. Most people give up, think it's too much trouble. But if you're patient, if you trust it, you get something that lasts, something that can survive almost anything." He moved closer, looked down at the page. Your mother's recipe. Her mother's, carried over from Mexico before Texas was even a state. She smiled slightly. I've kept that starter alive 7 years. Through heat and cold and running, it's the one thing that's never failed me. Must be nice, he said, having something that reliable. It is. She closed the book. But it's also lonely. Starter doesn't talk back, doesn't pull you from rivers, doesn't stand between you and men with guns. Salt? My name's Leonore. The admission surprised them both. Nora for short. Salt was just easier, safer. Leonore. He said it carefully, like tasting something new. It suits you better. Don't get used to it. After this is over, I'll be Salt again. Or maybe someone new entirely. After this is over, maybe you won't have to be. She looked up at him, saw the hope there. Fragile as spring ice. You really think we can win this against Greeley, against the law, against men like Morse who own both? I think we have to try. He sat back down, leaned forward. That ledger page, what exactly does it prove? Discrepancies. Grain purchased but not received. Cattle fees collected but not recorded. And Morse's signature on all of it. Would Morse recognize it if he saw it? In a heartbeat. Why? Because men like him don't stop stealing just because they got away with it once. If he's still at it. If we could prove a pattern. That's a lot of ifs. Better than no ifs at all. She considered this. You're talking about going to Amarillo, walking right into their territory. I'm talking about sending someone they wouldn't expect, someone who could ask questions without raising suspicions. Who? Tom Brennan's got a cousin who deals in cattle futures. Legitimate businessman, travels all over. Might be willing to nose around, see what stories are being told. And if Morse gets wind of it, then we're no worse off than now. He stood, moved toward the tent opening. I'll talk to Tom tonight. Meanwhile, you keep that page safe. It might be worthless in court, but it's still evidence. Still truth. Truth. She laughed softly. My mother believed in truth. Look where it got her. He turned back at the tent flap. Maybe she just needed better backing. Someone willing to fight alongside her instead of leaving her to face it alone. Like you're fighting for me. Like we're fighting for each other. He paused. That's what this is. Leonore, not charity, not pity. Just two people who've lost enough deciding maybe they don't have to lose anymore. After he left, she sat in the lamplight. Cookbook open but unseeing. The wind had died down, leaving the night quiet except for the usual sounds: cattle, horses, men settling for sleep. Normal sounds that seemed precious now, knowing how quickly they could be lost. She thought about her mother, dying in that small room while men argued about her guilt. Thought about Sam Boone, trying to turn a stampede because his brother believed he could. Thought about promises kept and broken, about hearts held clean and cold, about the difference between surviving and living. From her pocket, she pulled the ledger page one more time. Such a small thing to carry such weight. Numbers and names, columns and signatures. The careful record of one man's greed and another woman's honesty. Tomorrow, they'd reach the canyon country. Take the hard route because Easy had too many watchers. Trust in Tom's cousin and Elias's planning and her own ability to stay one step ahead of the past. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of something else. Hope. Maybe, or just the recognition that she wasn't alone anymore. That someone had heard her story and chosen to believe it. Chosen to stand with her against whatever came next. She folded the paper carefully, returned it to its hiding place. Then she banked the stove, dimmed the lamp, and made her way to her bedroll. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarred by clouds. Her mother would have called it a good omen. Leonore for tonight. She'd let herself be. Leonore pulled her blanket up and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But for now, she had a name spoken aloud, a truth shared, a burden no longer carried alone. It wasn't much, but after 7 years of running, It felt like everything. The storm built all day, starting as a smudge on the western horizon and growing into a wall of black that ate the sky. By late afternoon, the air hung thick and electric, making the cattle bawl and mill in nervous circles. Every cowboy could read the signs this would be a bad one. Nora felt it in her bones, the pressure dropping so fast her ears popped. She worked quickly to secure everything in the chuck wagon, lashing down pots and supplies with extra rope. The wind picked up, whipping her skirts and sending her carefully arranged cooking implements scattering. Storm coming fast. Billy Morrison rode in at a gallop. "Mister, Boone says to circle the wagons. Get ready for a blow." The men worked with practiced urgency, driving the supply wagons into a defensive circle, hobbling the horses in the center. The cattle were another matter, 2,000 head of longhorn spooked by electricity in the air, ready to run at the first thunderclap. Nora climbed onto the chuck wagon's seat, her triangle in hand. Sometimes the familiar sound of the dinner bell could calm nervous cattle, give them something to focus on besides their fear. She began to ring it in a steady rhythm, the metallic clang cutting through the rising wind. Lightning flickered on the horizon, still distant but moving closer. The first fat raindrop splattered in the dust, bringing the smell of wet earth and ozone. Then, as if someone had overturned a bucket, the sky opened. The rain came in sheets, horizontal in the wind, turning the world white. Nora couldn't see 10 feet beyond the wagon. Water streamed off her hat, soaked through her dress in seconds. Still, she kept ringing the triangle, the rhythm automatic now. Thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it seemed to split the air. The cattle bellowed in terror, and she could hear men shouting, trying to hold them. Another lightning strike, closer this time, illuminated everything in stark relief: cowboys on horseback, cattle with rolling eyes, the grass flattened by wind. That's when she saw him, Elias, riding hard along the edge of the herd, trying to keep them from breaking. His horse slipped in the sudden mud, recovered, pushed on. He was soaked through, hat gone, but still fighting to prevent disaster. The wagon lurched beneath her. The wind had caught the canvas cover, turning it into a sail. She felt the wheels lift on one side, the whole rig threatening to tip. The triangle flew from her hand as she grabbed for support, but the wet wood was slick, offering no purchase. "Salt!" someone yelled, but the storm swallowed the voice. The wagon tilted further. She could feel it going over. Knew she had seconds to jump or be crushed, but jumping meant landing in the path of panicked cattle if they broke. Stay or leap, both choices could kill her. Then Elias was there, spurring his horse through the chaos. He came alongside the tilting wagon at full gallop, reached out one arm. "Now!" he shouted over the storm. She didn't think, just lunged for him. His arm caught her around the waist, pulled her from the wagon just as it crashed onto its side. The momentum nearly unseated them both, but his horse, a steady cow pony who'd seen worse, kept its feet. They rode clear of the wreckage, Elias holding her tight against him as rain lashed their faces. She could feel his heart hammering against her back, or maybe that was her own. The distinction seemed unimportant in the chaos. He guided the horse to the shelter of some rocks, dismounted, pulled her down after him. They pressed against the stone, minimal protection from the storm, but better than nothing. Lightning struck so close she could smell the burning air, and the thunder that followed shook the ground. "You hurt!" he had to shout to be heard. She shook her head, unable to find words. They were both soaked through, shivering despite the warm rain. His hands were still on her arms, steadying her, and she realized she was gripping his shirt like a lifeline. Another lightning flash showed the cattle starting to run. The storm had won, turning the herd into a dark river flowing away into the night. Men rode desperately alongside, not trying to stop them now, just hoping to keep them together, prevent them from scattering to the four winds. "The wagon," she managed. "The supplies." "Don't matter." His voice was rough. "You matter." The words hung between them for a heartbeat. Then, Whether from the storm's wildness or the nearness of death or simply the breaking of too much held too long, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. Couldn't be, with the wind trying to tear them apart and the rain beating down like judgment. His mouth was warm against the cold, solid against the chaos. She tasted rain and desperation and something else life, fierce and undeniable. For a moment, she kissed him back, let herself feel what she'd forbidden for so long. Her hands found his face, his neck, holding on as the world came apart around them. Thunder crashed. Lightning painted everything in stark whites and blacks. And still they clung to each other like the last solid thing in a dissolving world. Then her mother's voice, clear as the dinner bell. "Keep your heart clean, mija, just fire and water." She broke away, stumbling back against the rock. "No!" "Leonor." "No." She pressed her hands to her mouth, could still feel the burn of him there. "I promised. I swore I wouldn't." "Wouldn't what feel, Liv?" He reached for her, but she pulled away. "Your mother's dead. That promise died with her." "It's all I have left of her." "It's killing you." The words came out raw, competing with the storm. 7 years of running, of being alone, of keeping everyone at arm's length. That's not living, it's just existing. "It's surviving." She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "It's staying clean, staying above reproach, staying frozen." He moved closer, not touching but near enough she could feel his warmth. "I've been frozen too, since Sam died. Thought if I never cared about anyone again, I'd never fail them. But that's not honor, it's cowardice." Lightning struck again, showing his face clearly. Rain ran down it like tears, but his eyes were fierce, alive in a way she'd never seen. "I'm not asking you to break your promise," he said. "I'm asking you to think about what your mother really wanted. Did she want you safe, or did she want you happy?" "Same thing." "Is it?" The storm was moving past, thunder grumbling away to the east. The rain still fell, but gentler now, the wind dropping to occasional gusts. In the distance, she could hear men calling to each other, trying to regroup after the stampede. "Jake saw," she said quietly. "He was on guard duty. He'll have seen us." "Let him. He'll tell Greeley. Use it against me. Say I'm exactly what they claimed, a loose woman using men for protection. Then we'll deal with that when it comes." He pulled off his jacket, useless wet thing that it was, and wrapped it around her shoulders anyway. "Right now, we need to check the damage. See who's hurt. Start putting things back together." She looked up at him, this man who'd pulled her from floods and storms, who stood between her and her enemies, who kissed like he was drowning and she was air. "Why?" "Why what? Why does it matter to you what happens to me?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the scattering storm. Then, "My brother loved thunderstorms. Used to stand out in them, arms spread wide, laughing. Said they made him feel alive. I always told him to come inside, stay safe." He turned back to her. "I've spent 2 years wishing I'd gone out in the rain with him instead, wishing I'd chosen living over safety. Just once. And I'm your second chance. We're each other's second chance." He held out his hand. "Come on, let's go see what's left of our outfit." She looked at his hand steady, calloused, patient, then at her own, still trembling from cold and fear and something else. The promise she'd made to her mother sat heavy in her chest, a stone she'd carried so long she'd forgotten its weight until now. But there was another memory too. Her mother in the kitchen, humming while she cooked, pausing to kiss Nora's father when he came in dusty from the fields, the way they'd looked at each other, like they were the only solid thing in a turning world. "She was happy," Nora said suddenly. "Before the trouble, before the accusations, she was happy with my father. They'd dance in the kitchen sometimes, when they thought I was asleep." "That's what she'd want for you." "Maybe." She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. "But wanting and having are different things. Greeley's still coming. The law's still against me." "One kiss doesn't change that." "No," he agreed. But it changes this. He gestured between them, and she understood. The careful distance was gone, washed away by rain and lightning and the taste of truth between them. Whatever happened now, they couldn't go back to the polite strangers they'd been. They made their way back to camp through the mud and scattered debris. The chuck wagon lay on its side like a dead buffalo. Supplies scattered across 50 yards of prairie. Men were already working to right it, salvage what they could. Tom Brennan rode up, hat gone, a cut on his cheek. I lost maybe 300 head. Mr. Boone. Could be worse. No men down, though Jimmy's horse broke a leg. Had to put it down. Injuries. Cuts and bruises. Nothing serious. Tom's eyes went to Nora. Took in her soaked state. Elias's jacket around her shoulders. Glad you're all right. Salt. Saw that wagon go over. Mr. Boone pulled me clear, she said carefully. Saw that too. Something in Tom's voice. Carefully neutral. Jake saw it as well. He's over by the remuda, talking to anyone who'll listen. Elias's jaw tightened. I'll deal with Jake. Tom, get the wagon righted. See what supplies we can save. Not much, I'm afraid. Most of the flour's ruined. Coffee, too. Nora surveyed the damage, mind already calculating. I can stretch what's left, make do until we reach a town. If we reach a town, someone muttered. She turned, found Jake Holloway standing near the overturned wagon. His clothes were torn, face muddy, but his eyes were sharp with malice. Something you want to say. Jake, Elias's voice carried warning. Just wondering how we're supposed to trust a cook who brings storms down on us. Bad luck, having a woman like that in camp, especially one who breaks her own promises first chance she gets. The men gathered closer, sensing trouble. Nora felt their eyes on her, judging, weighing, deciding. I saw you, Jake continued, pressed up against them rocks, carrying on while good men risked their lives with the herd. So much for the pure-hearted cook who won't let no man touch her. Watch your mouth, Tom warned. Why, it's true, ain't it? Jake looked around at the others. We all heard the stories, how she kept herself above men's attentions, how she was different, better. But first sign of trouble, she's throwing herself at the boss for protection. That's enough. Elias stepped forward. Is it? We're risking our necks for a woman who can't even keep her own word. What else has she lied about? Maybe Greeley's right. Maybe she did burn that storehouse. Maybe... The punch came fast, but not from Elias. Tom Brennan's fist connected with Jake's jaw, sending him sprawling in the mud. That's for speaking ill of a woman who's fed you fair for 2 weeks, Tom said, and for being a general snake in the grass. Jake struggled up, spitting blood. You'll regret that, all of you. When Greeley comes back, when he hears what I saw, he'll hear whatever you tell him, Elias said. And we'll tell the truth, that a good woman got caught in a storm and nearly died, that she was saved by someone who gave a damn. Anything else is your own dirty mind talking. Truth, Jake laughed. Ugly sound. You wouldn't know truth if it bit you. None of you would. He stalked off toward the remuda, leaving silence in his wake. The men shifted uncomfortably, not meeting Nora's eyes. Finally, old Charlie Briggs spoke up. Storm's passed. Best get to work if we want to eat tonight. The crowd dispersed slowly. Nora stood among the ruins of her kitchen, rain still dripping from her hair. Everything she'd built, the order and routine and safety of it, scattered like the supplies across the prairie. Elias appeared at her elbow. We'll make this right. Will we? She bent to pick up a pot, dented but salvageable. Jake's not wrong. I did break my promise. Let me kiss you in the middle of a storm, after nearly dying. He took the pot from her, set it aside. If that's a sin, then I'll take my share of the blame. Your share doesn't include being called loose, doesn't include having it used as evidence against you in court. No, he agreed. But it includes standing by what happened, not being ashamed of it. She looked at him, this man who'd chosen her side without hesitation. I'm not ashamed, just lost. 7 years of knowing exactly who I was, what I stood for, now. Now you're someone who survived a storm, someone who's allowed to be human. He touched her face gently. That's not breaking a promise. That's choosing to live. Around them, men worked to restore order. The cattle were gone into the darkness. Would need to be gathered come dawn. The wagon needed fixing, supplies sorting, a dozen tasks that couldn't wait. But for a moment, they stood in the wreckage. Two people forever changed by rain and lightning, and the truth that sometimes promises need breaking to let life in. Tomorrow would bring its own reckonings. Jake would spread his poison. Greeley would return. The law would demand its due. Tonight, though, Nora touched her lips and tasted rain and possibility. Her mother's voice was quiet now, replaced by the sound of her own heart, no longer clean and cold, but alive with all the messy, dangerous hope of living. The stars came out as the clouds cleared, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird began to sing. Dawn came pale and uncertain, revealing the storm's full damage. The prairie looked like a battlefield, gear scattered, wagon tracks carved deep in mud, the earth itself torn by thousands of hooves. Nora stood by the righted chuck wagon, surveying what remained of her kingdom. Half the supplies gone, her precious cookbook waterlogged but intact, the sourdough starter miraculously unbroken in its clay pot. "Found your triangle," Billy Morrison said, offering the dented instrument. "Was half buried in mud about 50 yards out." She took it, rang it once experimentally. The sound came out flat, wrong, but it would serve. Everything would have to serve now, damaged or not. The men had been out since first light, gathering the scattered herd. They came in by 2s and 3s, driving small bunches of wild-eyed cattle back to the main ground. The count was worse than Tom had estimated. They'd lost nearly 500 head to the storm and stampede. "Could have been the whole herd," Charlie Briggs said, accepting a cup of the weak coffee she'd managed to brew. "Seen it happen? Storm like that can scatter cattle from here to Mexico." But it wasn't the lost cattle that had the camp on edge. It was Jake's absence. He'd taken his bedroll and personal gear in the night, along with one of the better horses from the remuda. Lit out about midnight, Tom reported to Elias, took the paint mare and headed east. Toward Greeley, Elias said, "Most likely." Nora kept her hands busy with breakfast, what breakfast she could manage with ruined supplies. Thin gruel instead of biscuits, beans stretched with water, coffee that was more memory than substance. The men ate without complaint, but she felt their sideways glances, the weight of unspoken questions. After the meal, Elias called the outfit together. He stood by the remains of last night's fire, hat in hand, looking each man in the eye. "You all know what happened in the storm," he began. "Know what Jake saw, what he'll tell Greeley. You've got a right to know the whole truth before you decide whether to stay or go." "We're listening," Tom said. Elias looked at Nora. She nodded, stepped forward. "My name is Leonora Valdez," she said, voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. 7 years ago, my mother was accused of theft and arson at the Double K Ranch. She died before they could arrest her. The accusations were false, I have proof of that, but the men who made them have money and power, and they want me silenced." She pulled out the ledger page, held it up. "This shows the real thief was the ranch manager, Calvin Morse, but a piece of paper doesn't mean much against a bought judge and hired guns. So I ran, been running ever since." "And the kiss?" someone asked from the back. Heat rose in her face, but she met the question head on. "I made a promise to stay above reproach, give no one ammunition to use against me. Last night, in the storm, I broke that promise. Mr. Boone saved my life, and I'm not sorry for what happened after." "But Jake will use it," Charlie said, "twist it into something ugly." "Yes." The men digested this in silence. Then young Billy spoke up. My ma was accused of something once, stealing from the general store where she worked. Turned out the owner's son was taking money, blaming the help, but by the time the truth came out, we'd already been run out of town. Truth's got a hard time catching up to a good lie. Tom agreed, especially when the lie's got money behind it. So what do we do? Another man asked. Elias stepped forward again. We push on. Take the canyon route like planned. Try to reach Kansas before Greeley can gather reinforcements. Any man who wants to leave, I'll pay him off now. No hard feeling.
What about the brand? Charlie asked. We hired on to deliver cattle, not fight a war.
The cattle will get delivered, my word on that. But I won't lie, it might get rough. Greeley's not the type to give up easy. And now he's got Jake feeding him information. The men looked at each other, weighing loyalty against safety, wages against principles. Nora watched them, these hard men she'd fed and tended, wondering which way they'd fall. Tom Brennan spat in the dust. Hell, I never liked Jake anyway. Man who'd sell out his outfit for gold would sell his mother for silver. I'm staying, Billy said quickly. Salt Miss Valdez. She pulled a cactus spine from my hand last week. Didn't even fuss when I bled on her clean dish rag. One by one, the others voiced their decisions. Most stayed. A few asked for their wages, shook hands, and rode out without backward glances. When the dust settled, they'd lost 6 men plus Jake, leaving them short-handed but not crippled. All right then, Elias said. We move out in an hour. Tom, redistribute the watches. Charlie, check the remuda. We'll be pushing hard. As the men dispersed, Nora found herself alone with Elias by the wagon. That was brave, he said, telling them everything. Was it, or just necessary? She started packing what supplies remained. Jake's probably halfway to Greeley by now. By tonight, they'll know our route, our numbers, everything. Then we changed the route. He pulled out a worn map, spread it on the wagon bed. Look here, if we cut through Devil's Canyon instead of going around, we can save 2 days. Devil's Canyon. She studied the map. That's rough country. No water for 30 miles. We've got barrels, if we ration carefully. And if we don't make it, he folded the map. Then at least we'll fail trying something, instead of sitting here waiting for the axe to fall. She looked at him, really looked. The storm had changed him too, or maybe just revealed what was always there. The careful distance was gone, replaced by something fiercer, more determined. All right, she said, but I need to know something first. Last night was that just the storm talking, the closeness of death making everything seem more urgent than it is? He considered the question seriously. Maybe the storm gave me courage to do what I'd been wanting to do anyway. Maybe nearly losing you made me realize what I'd be losing. He paused. But no, it wasn't just the moment. It was the woman. A woman with a price on her head. A woman who feeds hungry men and keeps promises to the dead and draws rain spirals and flour. His hand found hers briefly. Worth any price. Before she could respond, Tom Brennan appeared. Riders coming, 3 of them, from the east. They turned to look. Not Greeley, these riders came openly, one leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. As they got closer, Nora recognized the lead rider as Porter, the trail boss from the Rocking J outfit. Heard you folks had some trouble, Porter called as he dismounted. Storm scattered half our herd too, but we were luckier with supplies. He gestured to the pack mule. Figured neighbors should help neighbors. Much obliged, Elias said, but his tone was cautious. What's the news from town? Porter's face went serious. That detective, Greeley, he's been busy, wiring back and forth to Amarillo. Gathering men. Word is he's planning something big. How big? 20 men, maybe more. And here's the interesting part, that judge he keeps mentioning. Hewitt. My cousin knows him. Says he's been buying up land around Amarillo cheap, using foreclosures and tax sales, usually right after some convenient legal trouble for the owners. Nora felt something cold settle in her stomach.
Like fires, stolen cattle.
Exactly like that. Porter pulled out a folded newspaper. This was in the Amarillo paper 2 weeks ago. Small item, but interesting. Calvin Morse, that name mean anything to you?
Yes,
The word came out tight.
thought it might. Seems Mr. Morse had himself an accident. Fell down some stairs at the gentleman's club. Broke his neck. Porter's eyes were knowing. Funny thing is, he'd been drinking with Judge Hewitt just before. And funnier still, Morse had just been named in some financial irregularities at the cattleman's bank.
Dead men tell no tales, Tom muttered.
No, they don't. Porter handed the newspaper to Nora. Thought you should know. Whatever game Greeley's playing, it's bigger than just one wanted woman. You've stumbled into something that has powerful men running scared.
After Porter left refusing payment for the supplies, saying trail law was payment enough, they broke camp with new urgency. The newspaper article burned in Nora's pocket next to the ledger page.
Morse dead. The man whose lies had killed her mother, whose greed had stolen 7 years of her life. Gone. Just when his past was catching up.
Changes things, Elias said as they rode. If Morse was killed to keep him quiet.
Then I'm not just a fugitive. I'm a witness to something they're still trying to hide.
She gripped the wagon reins tighter.
My mother always said the books would balance in the end. Maybe she was right.
They pushed hard through the morning, the shortened crew working double duty to keep the herd moving. By noon, they could see the mouth of Devil's Canyon, a gash in the earth that looked like its name, all red rock and shadow.
Last chance to go around, Tom said, pulling up beside Elias.
No, we go through. Elias stood in his stirrups, studying the terrain. Send Charlie and Billy ahead to scout water. We'll noon here, let the cattle graze while they can. As the outfit prepared for the dangerous passage, Nora set up a temporary kitchen. The supplies from Porter helped flour, coffee, salt pork. She could feed the men properly again, give them strength for what lay ahead. She was mixing biscuit dough when she saw it, a plume of dust on the eastern horizon. Too big for a few riders, too deliberate to be cattle.
Company coming,
she called out.
Elias was beside her in moments, field glasses to his eyes.
His jaw tightened.
It's them, Greeley and maybe a dozen men, coming fast. How far? 2 hours, maybe less.
She looked at the canyon mouth, then back at the approaching dust.
Can we make it?
Only one way to find out. He turned to the men. Strike camp, we're moving out now. The next hour was controlled chaos. Men threw gear onto pack horses, hazed reluctant cattle toward the canyon, abandoned anything not essential. Nora barely had time to secure her cooking supplies before the wagon was rolling. They entered Devil's Canyon like diving into a furnace. The red walls rose on either side, trapping heat and amplifying every sound. The cattle bellowed their displeasure but kept moving, driven by cowboys who knew the alternative was worse than any canyon.
Keep them moving, Elias shouted. Don't let them stop to think.
The passage was narrow, sometimes barely wide enough for the chuck wagon. Nora held her breath as the wheels scraped rock, praying nothing would break. Behind them, the dust cloud grew larger, closer. Then, disaster. A young steer spooked at shadows, tried to turn back. Others followed, and suddenly there was a knot of panicked animals blocking the canyon.
Cut them out, Tom yelled. Drive them forward.
But there wasn't time. Nora could hear hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. Their pursuers had entered the passage. That's when she remembered the other item Porter had brought. Black powder, meant for blasting stumps, still in its canvas wrap under the wagon seat.
Elias,
she held up the package. He understood immediately.
How much?
Enough.
Do it.
While the men fought to move the cattle, Nora and Elias worked frantically to set the charge. A narrow spot about 100 yards back, where the canyon walls nearly touched. Place it right, and they could close the passage behind them. You know how to do this? Elias asked.
My father did some mining. I watched.
She hoped that was enough. They set the powder, ran a fuse made from rope soaked in coal oil. The hoofbeats were louder now, voices shouting. Greeley's men, closing fast. Light it, Elias ordered. Nora struck a match with shaking hands. The fuse caught, sparking and hissing. They ran for the wagon as the first of Greeley's riders appeared around the bend. There, someone shouted. Stop them! Gunfire cracked, bullets whining off rock. Nora felt one tug at her skirt. Then Elias was lifting her bodily into the moving wagon, yelling at the team. The explosion came like thunder underground. The canyon shook, walls cracking. With a grinding roar, tons of rock cascaded down, filling the passage with dust and debris. When the echoes died and the dust began to settle, they were on one side and Greeley on the other. The canyon was blocked not permanently, but enough to buy them time. Everyone whole, Elias called out. Miraculously, they were shaken, dusty, but alive. Even the cattle had been shocked into forward motion by the blast. That won't hold them long, Tom said. They'll find another way around. Then we'd better make the most of our lead. Elias looked at Nora, and she saw pride in his eyes. Good thinking. Desperate thinking, she corrected, but she was smiling. They pushed on into Devil's Canyon, leaving their pursuers to rage at a wall of stone. The passage ahead was uncertain, water scarce, danger everywhere, but they were together. They were alive, and they were still free. The sun climbed higher, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold. Somewhere behind that wall of rock, Greeley was planning his next move. But for now, they had the cattle moving forward, the men working as one, and the knowledge that sometimes a well-placed explosion could change everything. Nora touched the newspaper in her pocket, thinking of Morse dead and secrets buried. Her mother had been right about the book's balancing. She just hadn't said how high the cost might be. The ambush came at sundown on the third day out of Devil's Canyon. They'd made good time despite the brutal heat and scarce water. But Greeley had made better time. He was waiting where the trail narrowed between two mesa walls, positioned perfect for crossfire. The first shot took Charlie Briggs's hat clean off. The second sparked off a rock inches from Nora's head. Then the canyon erupted in gunfire. Take cover, Elias roared, spurring his horse toward the chuck wagon. Nora was already moving, diving from the wagon seat as bullets splintered the wood where she'd been sitting. She hit the ground hard, rolled behind a wheel as lead sang through the air above her. The cattle, already nervous from 3 days of hard travel, needed no encouragement to stampede. They broke in a thunder of hooves, scattering every direction. Cowboys torn between taking cover and trying to save the herd. Through the dust and chaos, Nora saw Elias's horse go down. The animal screamed, thrashing, and Elias barely kicked free before it rolled. He stumbled, clutching his side, and she saw red spreading between his fingers. Without thinking, she broke from cover. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet as she ran, but she reached him just as his knees buckled. Together they fell behind a cluster of rocks. Minimal shelter, but better than nothing. Let me see, she demanded, pulling his hand away. The bullet had caught him along the ribs, tearing a furrow through flesh and muscle. Bad, but not fatal if kept clean. She ripped strips from her petticoat, pressed them against the wound. Stubborn woman, he gasped. Should have stayed put. Shut up and keep pressure on this. She risked a glance over the rocks. Greeley's men had good positions, but they'd been surprised by the stampede. Half were chasing spooked cattle instead of shooting. Tom Brennan had organized a defense, cowboys firing back from whatever cover they could find. But they were outnumbered and outpositioned. It was only a matter of time. Salt Billy Morrison crawled up beside them, face white with fear. Tom says there's a gap in the rocks. Mike could slip through to the north, circle behind them. How many men? 3, maybe 4. Small group, moving quiet. Nora looked at Elias, who nodded despite the pain. Do it.
Take Billy and whoever else can move quiet. We'll keep them busy here." "You're shot." "I've been shot before." He managed a tight smile. "Go, even the odds." She didn't want to leave him, but tactics were tactics. She stripped off her apron too white, too visible, and followed Billy into the rocks. Tom had found 2 volunteers, a Mexican vaquero named Santos and an older hand called Dutch. They moved like shadows through the broken country, using every fold of ground for cover. The gunfire continued behind them, punctuated by shouts and the occasional scream. Nora tried not to think about who might be hit, focused instead on placing each foot silent on the rocky ground. 20 minutes of careful climbing brought them above and behind Greeley's position. In the fading light, she could see everything Greeley commanding from behind a boulder. Jake Holloway beside him pointing out targets. Maybe 15 men spread along the ridge. "Too many," Dutch whispered. "Not if we're smart." Nora studied the layout. "See that overhang? The rocks are loose. Good push might bring them down." "Might kill us too," Santos pointed out. "Might." She pulled out her skinning knife. "Or might just make enough noise and dust to confuse things. Tom, you and Dutch work left. Get behind that stand of cedar. Santos, with me." They split up, creeping into position. Nora's heart hammered so loud she was sure Greeley would hear it, but the outlaws were focused on the cowboys below, confident in their advantage. She and Santos reached the overhang, studied the keystone rocks. It would take both of them, and the timing had to be perfect. She nodded to Santos, counted down on her fingers. 3, 2, 1. They threw their weight against the balanced stones. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding roar, the whole face gave way. Tons of rock cascaded down the slope, not directly onto Greeley's position that would have been too much to hope, but close enough to shower them with debris and send men scrambling. "Now!" Tom's shout rang out. Gunfire erupted from the cedars. In the confusion of dust and falling rock, Greeley's men couldn't tell where the shots came from. Some fired wild, others ran. The careful ambush dissolved into chaos. Nora saw her chance. Jake Holloway had separated from the group, was crouched behind a juniper trying to spot the new attackers. She moved up behind him, knife in hand. "Hello, Jake." He spun, hand going for his gun. She was faster, knife pressing against his throat before he could draw. "You sold us out," she said quietly. "For money, for spite." "Why?" "You know why." His eyes were wild but defiant. "Women like you don't belong out here, acting better than everyone, keeping men at distance, then throwing yourself at the boss when it suits." "That what you tell yourself?" She pressed the knife harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "That you're some kind of righteous man instead of a paid traitor?" Greeley promised gold, but gold won't buy back your honor. Jake, won't make the men respect you again, won't make you anything but what you are, a man who sold his outfit for coin. Gunfire crackled around them. Someone screamed. The battle was turning. Greeley's men falling back under fire from 2 directions. "You going to kill me?" Jake asked. She considered it. One push of the blade and the man who'd betrayed them would be gone. Her mother would have said justice. Elias would understand necessity. But Nora had seen enough death. "No, but you're going to do something for me." "What?" "You're going to tell the truth. About Morse, about the ledgers, about why Greeley really wants me." She smiled cold. "Or I'll let Tom Brennan have you. He's got brothers in every cow town from here to Missouri. You'll never work cattle again." "Greeley will kill me." "Then you'd better talk fast." She marched him down the slope at knife point, into the middle of the dying battle. Cowboys were mopping up, disarming the surrendered outlaws. Greeley himself was backed against a rock wall, gun empty, face twisted with rage. "It's over," Tom called out. "Drop the iron." Greeley threw down his gun, but his eyes found Nora. "This isn't finished. You can't fight the law forever." "Funny thing about the law," she said.
It changes when the truth comes out. Jake here has something to say. Don't you, Jake? Under the combined glares of the outfit, Jake crumbled. The words poured out how Greeley had approached him, how the detective was working for Judge Hewitt, how they needed Nora silenced before she could testify about what she knew. Morse kept 2 sets of books. Jake said. Hewitt was getting half the skimmed money. When things got hot, they blamed the Mexican woman, but the daughter had copies, evidence. That's why. Shut up! Greeley lunged for him. Santos clotheslined the detective with a casual arm, dropping him gasping in the dirt. Keep talking, Tom encouraged, chambering around for emphasis. Jake sang like a church choir. Names, dates, amounts. The whole rotten scheme laid bare. By the time he finished, even Greeley's own men were looking at their boss with disgust. You can't prove any of this. Greeley wheezed from the ground. Actually, I can. Nora pulled out the ledger page, now supplemented with the newspaper about Morse's death. And now I have witnesses. Lots of them. She turned to find Elias. He was on his feet, supported by Billy, shirt soaked with blood but eyes clear. Their gaze met across the battlefield, and she saw pride there, and something deeper. Ma'am? One of Greeley's men stepped forward, hands raised. We didn't know. Hired on for a legal posse? Not this. You know now, Tom said. The man nodded, looked at his companions. We'll testify. What we heard, what we were told. Don't hold with framing innocent folk. And just like that, the tide turned complete, from hunted to hunter, from accused to accuser. Nora felt something ease in her chest, not quite peace, but the promise of it. They made camp there. No point trying to move in the dark with wounded men and scattered cattle. Nora worked by firelight, cleaning and stitching wounds. Elias first. The bullet furrow washed with whiskey and sewn with the same careful stitches she used for torn gear. Hold still, she murmured, focused on her work. Trying. His hand found hers, squeezed. You saved us. That rock slide. Getting Jake to talk. We saved each other. That's what people do. She tied off the last stitch, covered the wound with clean cloth. Around them, the camp settled into exhausted quiet. Greeley and 3 of his men were tied secure, under guard. The rest had been disarmed and turned loose, wanting no more part of this business. What happens now? Billy asked. Bringing coffee. Now we gather what cattle we can find. Elias said, push on to the next town. Send wires to proper authorities. Ones Hewitt doesn't own. Tell our story to anyone who'll listen. And her, Billy nodded to Nora. The warrant. Based on lies told by a dead man and a corrupt judge. With Jake's testimony and these others, no honest court will uphold it. Nora wasn't so sure. The law had its own ways, and justice came slow when it came at all. But for tonight, she was free. They all were. Later, when the camp slept and only the night guards moved in the darkness, she found herself at the chuck wagon. Her hands moved automatic checking supplies, planning tomorrow's meals, maintaining the rhythm that had sustained her so long. Can't sleep. Elias appeared beside her, moving stiff but determined. You should be resting. Should be doing lots of things. He leaned against the wagon. Keep thinking about Sam. What he'd make of all this. What would he make of it? He'd laugh. Say I finally found something worth fighting for besides cattle and trail dust. He paused. He'd like you. Your courage. Your stubborn streak. My cooking. That too. He turned to face her. Nora Leonore, what happens when we reach Kansas after the cattle are sold? The story told. She'd been avoiding that question for days. Now, under stars and circumstance, she couldn't dodge anymore. I don't know. For 7 years, running was my only plan. Now I'm tired of running. Tired of being alone. Tired of keeping my heart locked up like preserved fruit. She met his eyes. But I don't know how to stop.
don't know how to be anything else. Maybe you don't have to be anything else. Maybe you just have to be yourself, and let that be enough. Is it enough? Instead of answering with words, he kissed her, soft this time, careful of wounds both physical and otherwise. No storm to blame, no death hovering, just two people choosing each other under the vast Texas sky. When they parted, she was crying. My mother would want you happy, would want you free, would want you to have what she lost, a life lived full, not just survived. The tears came harder then. 7 years' worth. He held her while she wept for all of it, her mother's death, the years of running, the loneliness, the fear. When the storm passed, she felt empty and clean, like a kitchen after deep scrubbing. I need to tell you something, she said. My full name. It's Leonora Elena Valdez y Delgado. My mother was Elena Maria Delgado de Valdez. We come from a long line of women who knew their worth, who stood tall despite what the world threw at them. Sounds like the line continues. Maybe, she wiped her eyes. But different now. Not alone anymore. No, he agreed. Not alone. They stood together in the quiet night, surrounded by sleeping men and scattered gear and all the debris of battle. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, gathering the herd, dealing with authorities, facing whatever justice looked like in a world where corrupt judges could buy verdicts. But tonight, they had this truth told, battles won, promises reconsidered in light of life's insistence on moving forward. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and indifferent, but beneath them, two people had found something worth more than safety. They'd found each other. Nora touched the stitches she'd placed in his side, felt him breathe beneath her hand. Still here, still possible, still time to learn what came after survival. The night wind brought the smell of sage and coming rain. Somewhere in the darkness, cattle lowed and men snored and the world turned on its ancient axis. And in the middle of it all, a woman who'd kept her heart clean and cold for 7 years finally felt it beat warm again. The rain started as they reached the crossing at Willow Creek. 3 days' hard push from where they'd left Greeley tied and waiting for the law. Fat drops at first, then a steady downpour that turned the trail to mud and made the creek rise by the hour. They'd gathered most of the scattered herd, but everyone was worn thin men, horses, and cattle alike. Nora stood at the creek bank, watching the water climb. It was running brown and angry, carrying branches and debris from upstream. Not as bad as that first crossing weeks ago, but dangerous enough with tired animals and a short crew. We could wait, Tom suggested, riding up beside the wagon. Let it drop some. Could be days, Elias said, still moving careful from his wound. And we've got Greeley's confession to deliver. Every day we delay gives Hewitt more time to cover his tracks. They'd sent Jake ahead with 2 men, carrying written testimonies to the federal marshal in Fort Worth. But paper was just paper until backed by witnesses. And Greeley wouldn't stay cooperative forever. There. Elias pointed to a wider spot upstream. Shallower there, better footing. We'll take them across in small bunches. As the men prepared for the crossing, an unexpected group appeared on the far bank, 3 riders leading a pack train. One of them was a woman, sitting her horse like she was born to it despite her town clothes. Hello, the camp, the lead rider called. Looking for the Circle Bar outfit. You found it, Elias called back. State your business. The man grinned, water streaming off his hat. Mrs. Margaret Dalton, widow of Judge Andrew Dalton from Austin. She's got business with a Miss Leonora Valdez, if she's with you. Nora felt her heart skip. Judge Dalton, she knew that name. Her mother had spoken of him, one of the few honest judges in Texas, but he'd been dead 2 years now. I'll cross to you, the woman called, already spurring her horse into the water. Ma'am, no, the rider protested. But Margaret Dalton was already halfway across, handling her mount with expert skill. She emerged dripping but dignified, fixing keen eyes on Nora. You're Elena Valdez's daughter.
It wasn't a question. Nora nodded slowly. Thought so. You have her look, her way of standing. Margaret dismounted, pulled an oilskin packet from her saddlebag. I've been looking for you for 2 years, ever since my husband died. He left instructions if anything happened to him. I was to find you and give you this. With shaking hands, Nora opened the packet. Inside were documents, sworn statements, copies of ledgers, correspondence between Calvin Morse and Judge Hewitt dating back years. Andrew was building a case. Margaret explained. Your mother came to him with evidence, but she died before she could testify. He kept investigating quietly, gathering proof. Then he got sick, sudden-like, on his deathbed. He made me promise to see it through. Nora read with growing amazement. Here was everything proof of the conspiracy. Evidence of other families destroyed by Hewitt's greed. A pattern of corruption stretching across 3 counties. Why didn't you take this to the authorities? Elias asked. Margaret's smile was bitter. Which authorities? Hewitt owns half the lawmen in North Texas. The other half are too scared to move against him. But now, she looked at Greeley, tied to his horse and glowering. Now you have a live witness. Combined with these documents and whatever Jake Holloway's saying, it might be enough. Might be. My husband's old friend is the territorial prosecutor in Denver. Clean man. Can't be bought. I was heading there when I heard about the trouble on the trail. Figured you might need these papers more than he does. Thunder rolled overhead, matching Nora's internal turmoil. 2 years this woman had been carrying evidence that could clear her name. 2 years of running that might have been avoided if... No, she stopped that thought. The past was done. What mattered was now. We need to cross, Tom interrupted. Water's still rising. What followed was controlled chaos. Small groups of cattle pushed across the swollen creek. Cowboys fighting to keep them moving straight. The chuck wagon went over on ropes, everyone holding their breath as water reached the bed. Nora clutched the packet of documents, wrapped now in 3 layers of oilcloth. They were almost done. Just the remuda left to cross. When Jake's horse appeared on the far bank, riderless, blood on the saddle. No, Billy breathed. Then Jake himself stumbled out of the brush, clutching his shoulder. Even from across the water, they could see the red spreading down his shirt. Hewitt's men, he shouted. Coming behind me, maybe 20 minutes. Elias didn't hesitate. Get everyone across now. The last of the crossing was a blur. Men and horses plunging through rising water. Jake hauled up behind Santos, everyone pushing for the far bank. They'd barely made it when riders appeared on the opposite shore, hard-faced men who didn't bother with pleasantries. Judge Hewitt's compliments, their leader called. He'll pay double what that woman's worth to anyone who brings her back triple if Greeley comes with her. Tell Hewitt he can go to hell, Tom shouted back. Bullets started flying, but the creek was too wide now, the rain too heavy. The gunfire was more threat than danger, but the message was clear. Hewitt wasn't giving up. They pushed on through the storm, Jake barely conscious in the saddle, everyone watching their back trail. Margaret Dalton rode with them, her 2 guards looking grimly professional. There's a way station about 5 miles on, she said. Run by a widow named Catherine Santos. Good woman, no friend to Hewitt. We can shelter there. The way station was a sprawling adobe compound, built like a fort. Catherine Santos met them at the gate with a shotgun, but lowered it when she recognized Margaret. Inside, quickly, she ordered. I've got room in the barn for the men, house for the wounded. Soon, Jake was laid out on a kitchen table, Catherine working to dig out the bullet while Nora assisted. The wound was bad, but not fatal. The bullet had missed anything vital. You're lucky, Catherine told him as she worked. Though maybe you earned some luck, warning your outfit like that. Wasn't right, Jake mumbled through the laudanum. What they wanted to do? Kill everyone who knew. Make it look like Indians. Elias and Nora exchanged glances. The stakes had just gone higher. That night, while the storm raged outside, they held council. Margaret laid out her husband's documents. Jake added what he knew of Hewitt's plans. Greeley, faced with evidence of his employer's willingness to massacre witnesses, finally broke completely. Hewitt's empire is built on stolen land. Greeley admitted. Every ranch he's foreclosed on, every family run out of town. The judge provides legal cover. Men like me provide muscle. Morse was the money man until he got greedy. Started skimming from Hewitt, too.
So Hewitt had him killed,
Margaret said. Pushed down those stairs personal-like. I was there. Greeley looked older, deflated. Starting to think I picked the wrong side? Starting to... Tom snorted. But Elias was thinking ahead.
How many men does Hewitt have coming?
Maybe 40, if he calls them all in. But that'll take time. Right now, 20, 25. We've got 15, counting your guards, Elias said to Margaret. 16 if Jake can hold a gun. 17, Catherine Santos said from the doorway.
This is my place. I'll defend it.
18, Nora said quietly.
I'm done running.
They spent the night preparing. Catherine had built her station solid walls thick enough to stop bullets. Clear fields of fire. A well inside the compound. By dawn, they were as ready as they could be. The rain was still falling when Hewitt's men appeared. They came careful, spread out, professional. The man himself rode in the center, protected by his hired guns.
Mrs. Santos,
Hewitt called out, voice carrying despite the rain. No need for unpleasantness. Send out the woman and my property, and we'll be on our way. Your property. Catherine appeared on the wall, shotgun prominent. You mean Mr. Greeley? Last I checked, people weren't property anymore. Judge. Don't play games. You're harboring fugitives. I'm sheltering travelers from a storm. Texas hospitality. You should try it sometime. Hewitt's face darkened. I'll give you 1 hour to reconsider. After that, well, accidents happen. Fires start easy in old buildings, even in the rain. He wheeled his horse around, and his men pulled back to discuss strategy. Inside the compound, Nora found herself beside Elias at a window, watching the enemy positions. We could still run, he said. Slip out the back while they're focused on the front. No. She checked the loads in the pistol Catherine had given her.
7 years is enough. Time to stop letting fear make my choices.
This isn't just fear. It's 40 guns against 18. 19. A new voice from the doorway. Porter stood there, water dripping from his coat. And behind him were 6 riders from the Rocking J outfit. Saw the smoke talk. Figured you might need help. How many more outfits are coming? Elias asked. 2 for certain. Maybe 3. Word spread about what Hewitt tried. Cowboys don't take kindly to massacres blamed on Indians. Porter grinned.
Besides, your cook makes the best biscuits on the trail. Be ashamed to lose her to a corrupt judge.
The odds were shifting. But outside, Hewitt was massing his men for an assault. Time was running out. That's when Margaret Dalton played her final card. She appeared on the wall beside Catherine, holding up a leather portfolio. Judge Hewitt, she called. I have here sworn documents detailing your crimes, every ranch you've stolen, every family you've destroyed, every bribe you've paid. Copies have been sent to the federal prosecutor in Denver, the Texas Rangers in Austin, and 3 major newspapers. Even through the rain, they could see Hewitt go pale. You're lying. Ask yourself how I knew about the Bronson Ranch, the Clearwater Holdings, the little Mexican family whose well you poisoned to force them out. She held the portfolio high. It's all here, Judge, every dirty detail, and more witnesses are coming forward every day. Hewitt sat frozen on his horse. His men exchanged uncertain looks. Fighting for pay was one thing. Fighting for a lost cause was another. First man who brings me that woman gets $10,000, Hewitt screamed. Nobody moved. 20,000. Still nothing. Then one of his men spoke up. Judge, maybe we should.
Shut up, attack now, burn them out.
But his men were already backing away. The promise of money meant nothing if they'd hang for earning it. One by one, they turned their horses and rode off into the rain.
Come back,
Hewitt raged.
I own you, I own this whole territory.
Not anymore, Greeley said quietly from his position at another window. Man's power only lasts as long as people believe in it, and yours just ran dry. In the end, Hewitt charged alone, mad with rage and the collapse of his empire. He spurred straight at the gate, pistol drawn. Nora stepped out to meet him. She stood in the rain, steady as stone, the pistol in her hand. Hewitt saw her, raised his weapon. Time slowed to heartbeats. 2 shots cracked almost as one. Hewitt's went wide, his horse shying at the last moment. Nora's didn't miss. The judge toppled from his saddle, landed in the mud, and didn't move again. Silence fell over the compound, broken only by the rain. It's done, someone said. But Nora knew better. Hewitt's death was just the end of one chapter. There would be inquiries, trials, the slow grinding of justice finally having its say. But the running was over. The fear was broken. She felt Elias beside her, solid and warm. You all right? Yes. She was surprised to find it was true. My mother used to say the books always balance in the end. Guess she was right. Usually are, about things like that. He took the pistol from her numb fingers. Come inside. You're soaked through. As they walked back to shelter, the rain began to lighten. Somewhere above the clouds, the sun was struggling to break through, and in the distance, dust plumes showed more riders coming cowboys from other outfits, drawn by loyalty and the code of the trail. The storm was passing. What came next would be harder in some ways, rebuilding a life instead of just surviving. But for the first time in 7 years, Nora faced the future without looking over her shoulder. The books had balanced. Now it was time to start a new ledger. 6 months later, the small restaurant sat beside the San Antonio River like it had always belonged there. Nothing fancy, just adobe walls, a wide porch, and a painted sign that read, Salt's Kitchen, in neat letters. The dinner bell that hung by the door was dented from its journey through storm and stampede, but it still rang clear when pulled. Nora stood in her kitchen at dawn, hands working the familiar rhythm of bread dough. Push, fold, turn, push, fold, turn. The sourdough starter, that 7-year survivor, bubbled contentedly in its crock. Through the window, she could see Elias working with a young Mustang in the corral, patient movements teaching trust. The bell above the door chimed. Tom Brennan entered, hat in hand, followed by Billy Morrison and Santos. They'd become regulars, stopping by whenever their work brought them through town. Morning, Salt, Tom said, though his smile acknowledged the name didn't quite fit anymore. Got room for 3 hungry cowboys. Always. She poured coffee without being asked, strong and black the way they liked it. Eggs and biscuits coming up. Billy, that hand healing proper. Yes, ma'am. He flexed his fingers, showing the pink scar where a rope burn had gone deep. That salve you made worked wonders. She was plating their breakfast when another familiar face appeared. Jake Holloway stood in the doorway, uncertain. His arm was still weak from the bullet wound, but he'd recovered enough to testify at the trials. His testimony, combined with the documents Margaret Dalton provided, had broken Hewitt's network wide open. Jake, she said neutrally. Miss Valdez. He shifted uncomfortably. I was hoping, that is, I wanted to. Sit down, she said, breakfast getting cold. He took a seat at the far end of the table, separate from the others but not unwelcome. It was progress. The trail taught hard lessons about redemption. Some men learned them, some didn't. Jake was trying. The morning rush brought townsfolk and travelers alike. Nora moved between tables with practiced ease, but this was different from the chuck wagon. Here, people lingered over coffee, shared gossip, made her kitchen a gathering place.
She'd worried, at first, that her past would follow her. But San Antonio was a practical town. They cared more about her biscuits than old scandals. "Heard from Margaret?" Elias asked, coming in from the corral. "Letter yesterday. The last of Hewitt's crew got sentenced. 5 years hard labor." She poured him coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. No hesitation now. No careful distance. "She's staying in Denver. Says the mountain air agrees with her." And Greeley turned state's evidence. Got 2 years. Probably be out in one with good behavior. She shrugged. Man was more fool than villain. In the end. The lunch crowd was thinning when Catherine Santos arrived in her wagon. The way station owner had become a friend, united by that shared stand against Hewitt's men. "Brought you something?" Catherine said, producing a bundle. "Found it at the market. Thought of you." Inside was a cookbook, leather-bound and pristine. French Cooking for the American Kitchen. The cover read, "Figured you might want to try some new recipes," Catherine said, "now that you're settled." Nora traced the unmarked cover, thinking of another cookbook, scarred by fire but still functional. That one sat on her shelf now, retired but honored. The ledger page that had hidden inside it was in federal hands, part of the permanent record of Hewitt's crimes. "Thank you," she said, "though I don't know much French." "Neither do your customers. Call it something fancy. They'll never know the difference." They laughed, and Nora felt the warmth of it. Female friendship had been another casualty of her years running. Nice to have it back. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors. A Mexican family, travel-worn and hesitant. The woman carried an infant, 2 older children hiding behind her skirts. "Senora," the man said carefully. "We heard. That is, someone said you might have work." Nora studied them, seeing her own family's story in their careful hope. "Can you cook?" "My wife. She makes the best tortillas in Coahuila." "Then I need her. The breakfast crowd keeps asking for them." She named a fair wage, saw relief wash over their faces. "There's a room above the storage shed, small but clean. You can start tomorrow." After they left, Elias found her in the garden she'd started behind the kitchen. Tomatoes and peppers, herbs and squash, things that put down roots. "That was good. What you did," he said. "It was necessary. I can't handle breakfast and dinner both. Getting too busy." "That's not what I meant." She knew, but some kindnesses were easier done than discussed. "How's the Mustang?" "Coming along. Might make a good horse for Billy. Boy's got gentle hands." He paused. "Speaking of coming along, we need to talk about something." Her hand stilled on the tomato vine. "Oh." "The Circle Bar wants me back. Spring drive coming up. Good money. Steady work." The words hit her like cold water. Of course. She'd known this was temporary. Him staying to help her establish the restaurant. Trail bosses belonged on the trail, not tied to town life. "When?" she managed. "That's what we need to talk about." He pulled out a folded paper. "This came yesterday." She read it, confused. It was a deed transfer, making him half owner of the property next door. "I don't understand." "Man needs a place to train horses, somewhere to come back to between drives. Figured next door was close enough to smell your biscuits, far enough to not be underfoot." "You're staying..." "Coming and going. Trail season's only part of the year. Rest of the time." He shrugged. Man could get used to home cooking. She wanted to laugh, cry, throw flour at him for scaring her. Instead, she said, "The Murphy place has good pasture. Needs work on the fences. I'm handy with repairs. And the barn's falling down. Billy and Tom offered to help rebuild. Said they'd work for meals." "Did they now?" She folded the deed, handed it back. "Seems you've got it all figured out." "Most of it." He stepped closer. "There's just one thing still unsettled." From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, Simple silver with a single small stone. Nothing fancy, but it caught the light like promises. "It was my mother's," he said. "Kept it in my saddlebags for 2 years, thinking someday, well, someday's here if you'll have it." Nora looked at the ring, at him, at the life they'd built from trail dust and courage. Her mother's voice was silent now, that old promise fulfilled in ways Elena Valdez never could have imagined. The heart she'd kept clean and cold had learned to beat warm again, and the world hadn't ended. It had begun. "Yes," she said simply. He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit like it was meant to. When he kissed her, it tasted like coffee and forever and home. The wedding was small, held in the restaurant garden on a clear October day. Tom Brennan stood as best man, Catherine Santos as matron of honor. Billy played fiddle, badly but with enthusiasm. Cowboys from 3 outfits attended, cleaned up and awkward in their town clothes. Margaret Dalton came down from Denver, bringing news that the last of Hewitt's holdings had been returned to their rightful owners. Jake Holloway sat in the back, still finding his place but no longer outcast. Even Porter brought his whole crew, claiming they'd ridden 2 days just for Salt's wedding cake. "Do you, Leonora Elena Valdez y Delgado, take this man?" the preacher asked. "I do." The words came strong and certain. "Do you, Elias Samuel Boone, take this woman?" "Every day and twice on Sundays." Laughter rippled through the gathering. The preacher looked disapproving but continued. Rings exchanged, promises made, and then they were married. No longer trail boss and cook, but husband and wife. The celebration lasted into evening. Stories were told, songs sung badly, and more food consumed than seemed possible. As night fell and guests began departing, Nora found herself on the porch, watching stars appear. "No regrets?" Elias asked, joining her. "About what?" "The promise. Keeping your heart clean all those years? Could have had this sooner if—" "No." She turned to face him. "Everything happened when it needed to. The waiting, the running, the fear it all led here, made us who we needed to be to find each other." "Your mother would be proud." "She is." Nora touched the ring on her finger. "Somewhere, she is." Inside, the last guests were leaving. Tom paused at the door. "You know the boys will expect trail food when you visit the drives. Already planning to pack a wagon. Can't have you eating some other cook's biscuits." Wouldn't taste right anyway. After everyone left, they stood in their kitchen now, shared and certain. The old chuck wagon triangle hung on the wall beside her mother's burned cookbook, reminders of the journey that brought them here. "What now?" Elias asked. "Now," she untied her apron, hung it on its hook. "Now we live, day by day, meal by meal. No running, no hiding, just living." "Sounds good to me." Outside, rain began to fall, gentle and nourishing. Nora watched it beat on the windows, thinking of spirals drawn in flour, of promises kept and broken and remade. Her mother had taught her to keep her heart clean with just fire and water. But life had taught her something more, that hearts were meant to be filled, not just kept clean. That love was worth the risk of loss. That trust was worth the chance of betrayal. That a life fully lived beat mere survival every time. She drew a spiral on the steamed window, added rain marks around the edge, not calling the weather anymore, just acknowledging it. The storm had passed. What remained was the garden it would grow. In the morning, there would be bread to make, customers to feed, a life to build beside a man who'd stood between her and danger without counting the cost. But tonight, there was just this: the sound of rain on roof tiles, the warmth of a wood stove, and the knowledge that some trails, no matter how long or hard, really did lead home. The heart she'd kept virgin, untouched by scandal or shame, now beat full and rich with the mess and glory of being human. Her mother's promise, honored in spirit, if not letter,
had brought her through 7 years of wilderness to this moment of grace. And in the end, that's what it was, grace. Unearned, unexpected, but absolutely real. Like rain after drought, like bread after hunger, like love after a lifetime of being alone. The restaurant sign creaked gently in the wind, and somewhere in the distance, a dove called to its mate. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own joys. But tonight, Leonora Elena Valdez y Delgado de Boone was home. And that, as her mother would have said, was worth any price paid to achieve it. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Nora and Elias on their journey from the dusty trails of Texas to finding home and love. Where are you listening to this story from? Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover these authentic frontier stories. Until next time, partners.